locally and nationally to promote the value of standardized testing and testing in general on our campuses and throughout our communities. So, my name is Jarrett Dyer. I will be presenting today along with Nora Ben-Dove and Dr. James Wallach. Nora and I were at the ATP 2018 conference a few weeks ago, and we'll be sharing our insights and our takeaways from that. Dr. Wallach will be fielding questions regarding the value of testing from a psychometrician's perspective, and a presentation, as it were, on the value of testing from his perspective and what we can take away and go back to our testing centers. So, at this question, Jim, are we up with the sharing of the screen yet?
I believe so. Are others able to see? It tells me I'm sharing. Jody, is it showing through?
If anyone could respond and just let us know.
Yes, it's showing. This is Mary.
Perfect. Thanks, Mary.
Hello, Mary. Thank you.
Okay. You ready, Jared? Next slide.
Okay. All right. Thank you all very much. If we can go to slide 2.
And
so for the last
this will be available for those of us who can't see the slides at a later date?
Yes, we are recording the entire webinar. I do apologize for those who cannot. Fortunately, you're going to be lulled to sleep by my dulcet tones on your lunch break. But feel free, those of you who cannot see, unmute yourself and ask a question if you would like. This is to be a conversation. Or if it doesn't feel appropriate, please use the chat feature, and then Jody will collect those, and towards the end, we'll be able to respond. For the last 2 years, slide 2, please, Jim. ATP has...
I'm not able to get this. It's like hijacked my machine. I'm not able to switch.
Okay. Jody, can you take over?
I can do this, maybe, if it lets me.
Okay. Well, I'll continue talking about the ATP's efforts, and then we'll go. Hopefully, we'll have something for you to look at here in a few minutes. If it's possible for Jody to take over and to take a look at the slides, that would be fantastic. For the last 2 years, NCTA has been invited to the ATP conference as part of a cross-industry discussion regarding promoting the value of testing in different organizations. Specifically, their annual conference has been titled Innovations in Testing, and the subcategory was leading the conversation promoting the value of testing. It was a fantastic experience to be able to present alongside several other organizations. The big difference this year is that, well, last year was a conversation about promoting the value of testing. We all kind of realized at the end that we're all preaching to the choir. And so for 2018, we took a bit of a harder look at, were we actually communicating the value of testing amongst our own members? Were our members equipped to discuss the value of testing themselves? And what were we doing outside of our organizations, so speaking to organizations? Quickly, if the slides are up, if we can go to slide 3, I'm going to run through the different organizations that were on the panel. If not, I will just say them out loud. We were joined with a representative from the Association of Test Publishers, and a representative from the Institute for Credentialing Excellence, or ICE, the International Test Commission, combined member from the American Educational Research Association and the National Council on Measurement and Education, AERA, or NCME, and SIOP, the Society of Industrial and Organizational Professionals. There's one member of each, and we all fielded several questions from the facilitator, and then questions from the audience. The first question, and I'm going to open this up to the floor. Please feel free to unmute yourself and respond. This is going to be the beginning of our sharing portion, because I want to gauge how all of you are feeling. The first question that we asked ourselves was, beyond sharing with our individual members, what outreach are you doing, or would you advocate to be done to share the value of testing beyond your membership, for example, with educators, legislatures, or the public at large? And I'd like to hear from a few of you. I'm curious if you are aware of some of the outreaches that NCTA has done, if there are things that you are doing in your community, and what more do you believe can be done to promote the value of testing locally and nationally and even globally? Anyone brave enough to respond? Any questions coming in, Jody, through the chat box?
Hi, this is Sarah. I was just chewing. I'm so sorry. But I know through OCTA here in Ohio, we do a lot with the HEAD and with our State Board of Education, Board of Regents as well. And I think doing some of those statewide Board of Regents work really helps to kind of solidify the organization's importance. Okay.
Excellent. What kind of feedback have you received when OCTA has gone back and said, listen, these are standards and these are beliefs? Has it been generally accepted? Have you received pushback?
We've mostly gotten some pretty good feedback from people who are involved in state testing, who don't necessarily know that we even exist, know that there is a professional organization, NCTA. So I think part of what we need is bringing attention and sharing what we know, and so we're finding that people are coming back to us at least a little bit more, asking questions. If you know, especially people on my campus who are involved in the state organization.
Okay. Thank you. Excellent.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else? Initiatives that have worked, best practices that have worked? Didn't think I'd ask you to talk on your lunch break. Yes, did I hear one, or I will continue on? Okay, keep the questions coming. Again, you can use the chat feature if you have any other suggestions or ideas of what we can do. I wanted to then share a bit of a history of what NCTA has done. Are we up and sharing yet, Jody, or no? This would be slide 5. Okay, I'll take those. We're probably still having technical difficulties. So historically, NCTA has always had a initiative, a line in our strategic plan to impact policy. Frankly, we had not been really presented with the opportunity to do so until the last 18 months. We initially, as I hope most of you know, worked with the Association of Test Publishers to create proctoring best practices, which is kind of our first foray into a cross industry effort. Since then, in the last year, we have worked advocating 2 different organizations. One is the Copyright Office in Washington, D.C. The second is the United States Congress, specifically advocating for more stringent control in online proctoring and testing, as it is discussed in the Higher Ed Act. All of those are under Goal 3 of NCTA's strategic plan, which has increased the credibility of NCTA in order to position the organization to play a role in the testing industry policy decisions. From those, we've started lots of great conversations. Just most recently, I hope all of you are aware, and if not, we're sharing it now, that we have entered into another agreement with the Association of Pest Publishers to create online proctoring standards. This, in essence, would be taking all of the work, or I'm sorry, some of the work from proctoring best practices and creating an actual standards document that industry, testing vendors, and publishers would hopefully subscribe to. There's obviously no requirement that they would subscribe to the standards, but that they would hopefully subscribe to the standards going forward. That working group is being formed right now. I'm happy to say that the co-chair from NCTA is Paula Duffman, and she will be working with Eric Salfa from Scantron on the ATP side, putting those standards together. So in the process of kind of doing this, I'm now on slide 7. If we're up, I wanted to open it up again with the next question that we were faced with. The question is, we've certainly seen some very vocal movements that seek to push back on testing. Everything from the opt-out movement to the Fair Test Organization to the legislative mandates regarding recertification. Now, my question to the audience is, what do you feel? Do you think the industry has a public perception problem regarding the value of testing? Would anyone like to respond? I can say that the stance that NCTA as an organization took is looking at what has come across the listserv and some really a lot of the things we've discussed through conference presentations is that, yes, we have seen maybe more in the K-12 space, but definitely that impacts us when those students move on to college, that there seems to be this, everyone has an anecdotal story about why the test didn't work, why they're a bad test taker, why testing should go away, and they should be able to look at a different assessment to do X, Y, and Z. And so our challenge to the group as a whole was what we can do to help influence public's perception of the value of testing. And so very much that is what leads us to the meat of the presentation that we have today. Was a bit of a history, and that really is what can we do as NCTA to share the value of testing amongst ourselves and to work that everyone is confident to be able to say to a parent that comes in and tells a test center administrator that the placement test is flawed or that their student doesn't need to submit a score for X, Y, and Z, that we'll be able to more comprehensively understand and to share that information back. And so now I'm also going to open this up, not for feedback, but as a call to everyone else. This is a conversation, and we're an amazing community at NCTA. This webinar, hopefully, will be the beginning of a number of conversations going forward. If you have something that's worked for you on your community, if you have industry information and expertise, or if you'd simply like to share or have a question answered about how to better discuss the value of testing, specifically the value of testing, I say the series for that, please email myself, Jody, Nora, Jim, or anyone else in the organization that can get the ball rolling. And we would like to get another webinar in the near future that you could facilitate and share that information with everyone else. So please put that in the back of your hat if there's something that you would like to share, and we'll go from there. So at this point, I'm going to move, if Nora, are you ready?
I am. Can you hear me?
I can. Is this a good time, or would you like to switch it around?
It is definitely a good time. They're all distracted.
All right, everyone. Nora is going to share some of her takeaways from ATP as a first-time attendee, and we'll go from there. Please take it away, Nora.
Want to?
Good morning, everybody on my side of the coast, and happy lunch to everybody else. So for me, this was a very interesting kind of moment. I've been an NCTA member for the better part of about 11 years. I've attended multiple NCTA conferences, AccuPlacer, CLEP conferences, all the College Board. And for us, it's always testing centers and then some vendors and maybe some third party of some sort. But for the most part, it's us just sitting around talking about what we do day to day, on and off, and dealing with clients directly, because that's our norm. In this case, though, ATP is basically all our third party vendors, our normal vendors, and then psychometricians from the different companies, and basically those who we've never really had to deal with, we never really talked to, but they either want the certification licensing and they deal with their own back end. So it was kind of like being behind, I mean, I'll call it behind the firing line, behind the curtain, kind of seeing what's going on. Also kind of like a matrix type of situation, but we both know each other's world. We both know we exist. We just don't deal with each other one-on-one. So it was a completely different perspective for me to be sitting next to somebody who is actually part of the bar examiner, somebody who actually deals with code counsel, all the different little perspective areas that, you know, that they know that I exist, but they don't deal with me at all. And so what they understand is a little bit differently. One of the things I sat in on was Jarrett did a presentation with multiple other members in a kind of family feud situation, and talking about the different things that can go wrong during an exam. And I was literally surrounded with people who have never dealt with clients one-on-one, and they were shocked and surprised by the different situations that could possibly happen in a testing center, dealing with cheating, dealing with emergencies, dealing with one-on-one client relations. These are stories that they may have heard through the grapevine, but they're not actually having to deal with them at all. So what they understand is not what we understand. And it's, as I said, a different perspective of that, because there's no way for them to actually get it without actually hearing it from us. And that's the unfortunate thing, is that they don't normally deal with us, so they don't understand that. So going on to the next section with the creating the conversation, I think that we kind of have to change the view. Those of us who deal with clients one-on-one all day long, we know from start to finish. We know that there's a whole situation of creating the scheduling, dealing with the scheduling, dealing with the check-in, dealing with the clients during the exam, and then the aftermath of getting them the scoring, uploading, scanning, and just trying to finalize the session and then moving forward. So I've always considered it kind of like the airplane theory, that we are both, we are the TSA, we are the security check-in, we are the pilot making sure that everything takes off and lands, and we are also the flight attendant making sure that everybody is comfortable. And that is, as I said, that's not a perspective that they're used to. They just create the exams, they send them out. They have obviously created guidelines for us. If any of us have taken any type of how to do the test, any type of proctoring certification, we know that, you know, that they give us the breakdown, but it's not as if somebody is actually sitting there and have maybe done it start to finish themselves. So they don't understand the full airplane theory. But that's where I go into the next section with turn the triangle over. Anyone who has sat in my leadership kind of management workshops may have heard this before, but those of you who have not, everybody kind of knows the triangle theory of business, where the CEO or the leader is on the top, and then it trickles down to the managers, and then the lower manager, and then the employee who deals directly with the clients. And in good management leadership theory, the triangle is actually turned the opposite way, where because we are on the front lines, where we deal directly communicating with the clients, we deal with the security, we deal with everything, while the CEO does not deal with any of that. We are the ones that need to be on the top, because we are the ones who need to have the most support. And then everybody below us needs to be the one who gives us that support. So if you feel that you're not getting that from the school, if you're not getting that from the other vendors and whatnot, this is the time for us to really kind of come together with ATP and kind of explain to them what we need for that support, whether it's the vendor, whether it's the third-party vendor, anyone that we can basically directly talk to and have this conversation with, so that they understand where they're helping us and maybe where they're not helping us, where they're making our life easier and where they're not making our life easier. That goes from the regular scheduling software that maybe we're using online. Maybe that goes from the help desks. A lot of us have had to deal with trying to get support if something's going wrong technically, if something's going wrong with scheduling, if something's going wrong with the client. Since we are, the one-on-one with the client during the entire process, and they are not, sometimes they don't understand that it's not the easiest situation sometimes when that is happening right then and there. And, I always say that we see people on their best day sometimes, and we see people on their worst day at times, where you've had people crying because they've either passed a test or they haven't passed a test, if somebody's cheated or is not cheated. And we need that support from the vendors and the third-party vendors. So then I'm going on to the last one, which is the last column, which is solutions, which is all about kind of locating and creating that value. So since we have the proctoring best practices and now we're moving on to the online proctoring and practices, perhaps it's also time for us to think about how to put together something that explains the value of what we do and how we need those solutions for us. So kind of developing a newfound respect for our services and full comprehension of the day-by-day battle. And I think the vendors and the third-party vendors are 100% open to hearing what we need and how we need the solutions created. And I think that for the next ATP conference, if I'm able to attend with Jared and Jim, hopefully we can create some type of workshop or presentation where we discuss what we need from them and what our day-to-day battles kind of are and how to create a solution. So that's all I've got, if anybody has any questions.
Hearing none, I wonder if maybe I should jump in. So I don't know if people are able to see my screen or not. I've had a host of technical issues, including losing the phone connection for about 5 minutes or something. So hopefully things I say won't be redundant. And my computer tells me I'm sharing the screen, but I'm skeptical. Anyway, it's not going to be a big surprise, I think, to anyone that I'm a pretty strong advocate of standardized testing. But the very fact that we're even having this conversation and having this conversation as a testing industry for probably, the better part of a year and a half or 2 years does suggest, I think, that we have a little bit of a problem on our hands. So I think it would be helpful, and maybe I'd like to start by trying to understand the problem a little bit better in hopes that maybe it'll help us figure out ways to overcome it. So why does testing have a bad rap? And I think there are a few reasons that at least that I can come up with for it. The first one, pretty obvious, that testing's unpleasant. I don't know anyone who really enjoys testing, and so we're seeing a lot, especially in education, where because we're competing with so many other schools and everything, that a lot of schools are going test optional, whether it's admissions testing or placement testing or whatever, really out of this fear that, we don't want to present our students with something unpleasant because they might choose to go to a different institution as a result of that. We might actually lose potential students because we're asking our students to do something that's unpleasant. That actually doesn't really speak to the validity of the tests at all. And I've often kind of joked, tongue in cheek, that if students are averse to testing, you should find another way to spend the next 4 years. But that's certainly something that we're up against. Another one that comes to mind, and perhaps what I think is maybe the biggest problem that we're facing, is that testing's ubiquitous, and examples of bad testing practice are all over the place. So, I was thinking about this and trying to come up with an analogy, and the best that I can do is this. You ever gone to a park and watched kids, who are like, 8 and under playing soccer? So, I used to do that as a kid. I know it is hilarious, but because when you're watching soccer, the outcomes are really tangible, right? Scoring goals, playing defense, avoiding penalties, that sort of stuff. The game that 8-year-olds, play, it's hardly even identifiable as the same sport that they play in the World Cup. It's not just that the older players are more skilled, all the strategy is different, the approach to the game is different, and as we watch the game, that's really easy to see. With testing, it's not so much the case. We've got ACT and ETF, Pearson, and the National Board of Medical Examiners, and all the big, companies who are playing the same game as 4th grade teachers, the customer service managers at Red Robin, and Regis Philbin, when he's making up his questions for Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. And the problem is that most people don't see any difference between them. They just see multiple choice items, and they don't recognize any differences. So testing, as a result of that, I think is defined by everyone's worst experiences. And unfortunately, it's been pretty easy to find examples of items
about testing having a bad rap and nobody is consistent. Oh, I missed that part.
So I'm sorry. I think I'm getting. Was somebody asking something or? Anyway, so I think that the testing is being affected by the fact that a lot of people who really aren't expert in developing and maintaining tests, especially multiple choice tests, still use that tool, and they use that tool a lot. So as a result, we have a lot of experiences with items that simply aren't working well, with tests and test experiences that aren't fair, and all the common criticisms that we hear about tests. So one of the things that I started to do whenever I give talks on test construction or talk, sort of broadly about the testing industry, is to try to really call attention to the fact that the standardized testing industry follows a really elaborate process to develop tests. ATP has put together a web page as part of this conversation, part of this initiative, which I think really highlights the different steps in the test development process and does this very well. The website is www.leadingthecconversation.org/value-testing.aspx. And I'm not going to go into a detailed discussion of each of the steps, but there are a couple of key components that I think it's important for everyone to know. One is that there's a real science underlying the process of identifying the types of things to assess and the distribution of the content. Right? The fact that the test is measuring the things that it does, the way that it's doing it, isn't happenstance, but it's really painstakingly deliberate. The process also brings in a lot of subject matter experts who are involved in item writing, item revision, and doing all of that in accordance with very carefully crafted standards for what's best practice in writing items. The items are also subjected to many different levels of review for content, for clarity, technical accuracy, making sure that the items conform to any specifications that they may have within their unit. There's also a fairness review that often takes place. People looking at the items just to make sure that the vocabulary, the item context, all of that stuff isn't going to be disadvantaging any particular group of examinees. Also, unlike what you get in a classroom exam, where you'll have a professor who, writes brand new items and then arbitrarily says you need to get 90% of this right to get an A. The standards, the decisions like pass, fail, or what gets you into different levels in an accountability exam is a very rigorous process of blending of science and data and expert judgment, all of it coming to bear in deciding where those cut scores should be. So again, a very different process. In addition, the items are always pilot tested, and so they're shown to several hundred, maybe to thousands examinees before they ever actually be used operationally. It's another big difference. Any items that are poorly written, and items, even if you write them to the standards, there are going to be some items that don't work the way you expect them to. But those items don't survive the pilot testing in a standardized testing program. So the score is always based on items that we actually have data to tell us that they're working as they should. So really the whole point of validity is documenting the value of the test and the utility of scores for a particular purpose. And through this process, standard tests add value, often significant value, over what information is available in their absence. Couple of other points I'll try to make real quickly as far as the bad rap. I've heard that the argument that testing, encourages teaching to the test or drill and kill, and that's just really, I think, a gross misrepresentation to say that it encourages, teaching to the test or drill and kill. We know that some of that happens. It's not supposed to happen. It's always clear in testing materials that shouldn't happen, and it's not encouraging it any more than tests are encouraging teachers to tamper with student answers after the fact. The research also, where drill and kill is concerned, is that it doesn't really work. It actually doesn't produce the sort of score gains that you expect, because, again, contrary to what is popular opinion, the items, the way they're written nowadays, are very often measuring skills that don't play well to drill and kill. They're measuring comprehension, they're measuring application, higher order thinking skills, those types of things. The last thing that I want to say, so that's sort of it for testing getting a bad rap, but I want to talk a little bit about the value of standardization, because I think it's hugely valuable. If you don't have that, then everything else is really an apples to oranges comparison. Like grades, for example, right? Grades are norm referenced within a school and even within a class. And although we might be able to agree that students who have GPAs of 4.0 are strong students regardless of their institutions, I don't think we can say that all the way down the scale. So students with grades of 3.0, for example, they vary tremendously. And at some schools, those are going to be the students who will be getting straight A's. And at other schools, those students might just be very, very average. And other variables that are often considered, whether we're talking about, letters of reference, statements of purpose, quality of people's experiences, evaluating those all involve a tremendous amount of subjectivity, and in many senses, they're also norm referenced, because, letter writers are evaluating with respect to the other sorts of individuals who they have experience with. Who are probably, going to the same schools and all of that. So standardization and standardized test scores really provide that only opportunity to evaluate all candidates along a truly common, objectively scored metric. And it's still fine to use multiple pieces of information. Again, I'm an advocate for doing that. You shouldn't be looking exclusively to the test score on a standardized test to make decisions. but that score really, really helpful to allow people to correctly interpret the rest of the information in the candidate's portfolio. And if all the data elements communicate basically the same story, it's great. But if they don't, if there are these inconsistencies between test score and the other information, then it's very reasonable, I think, to use the test score information to essentially recalibrate the information from the rest of the portfolio, so that you can, improve our ability to directly compare candidates in a way that's fair, less subjective, and so I think that's pretty much it for my comments. And I think we're at the end of our slide deck in the event that you are able to see the slides that I'm presenting here. And so I think we're at the point now where we're open to questions from all of you. Any questions, any comments on things that you may have heard? Reactions from your own experiences?
Jim, this is Jody.
Hi, Jody.
Hey. Let's see. I have a few on the chat. Let's see. Sorry, as a new NCTA member and fairly new testing center, what can we do to help people understand the value of testing?
Yeah, I mean that's a great question. I think that's why we're all here. I think so from my perspective, I think we want to always be looking to the validity data, asking ourselves, well, what validity data are they using for purposes for which, in fact, I don't think I mentioned that. That was something else that I wanted to mention too, was that very often, all too often, I think we are using tests for purposes for which they aren't really intended, that they may not have been developed just because it's convenient to do so. And there's often not validity data to support those uses. And so, I think the public has a tough time distinguishing between, like, it doesn't make sense to them that you can use a test for placement but not for achievement, or measuring, student learning but not teacher effectiveness. Those are really subtle distinctions. But it's important for us as an industry to really promote using tests for their intended purposes for which there exists good, strong validity data. And if there's not validity data to support a particular use, then, even though it may be convenient and it may not be transparent, that, we shouldn't use something, that it wouldn't be valid if we made an effort to do that research. Until we have those data, that we really shouldn't be using tests in ways that are unintended. So I think that's one of the big things that we can be doing. Nora and Jared, I'm sure you have some thoughts on that as well.
Well, I would say that webpage that we have, the leadingtheconversation.org, is a good one for someone to show the school. And then on the upper right-hand side, there's actually a separate link as well for promoting that whole conversation of the value of testing. So both of those could be shown to the school. It could also be shown to parents in any way, just to explain to them what the validity information is, because I don't think that just showing them psychometric breakdowns or anything like that is going to 100% assist them. They actually, I think, have to see it in kind of a written form as to why there is a value behind every single level of testing. That's all I have from my side.
And Jim, just for the sake of all of those in the audience, we're talking about validity data. Could you break that down just in layman's terms from your perspective? What does that mean? What does that look like? And how can we communicate that to a parent or a faculty member or a dean that's in our office and saying, no, I have a friend that has used XYZ assessment to look at geography students. I know that's not what it says in the catalog, but I think we should do that. What do we say at that point?
Right. So, yeah, I mean, validity is all about having data to support the inferences that we're making from test scores. So if we're making an argument that a particular test is useful for what was your example? Some geography as a geography assessment, there should be some data to suggest that it actually is doing that and is doing that well. And there are different ways you can do that, different ways that you can validate an instrument. But asking a colleague, hey, does that seem to be working for you, really isn't one of them. The APA standards doesn't say anything about anecdotal data in assessing validity. I mean, we're really talking here about doing careful search, collecting data, and analyzing that. It can be with respect to, content is certainly one reasonable way to look at a piece of the validity argument. Is there a reason looking at the content to suggest that this is going to be measuring measuring that construct that you're trying to measure? But it's much, much deeper than that. You would actually probably so you would probably want to find some other data that says, look, here's some other tool that we know is also measuring geography. Are these similar? Are they similar? Are they not similar? Are the students who are scoring high on this geography assessment also the ones who are doing better in the course? Those types of studies that we really need to look at before we can comfortably say that this test is appropriate for that particular use. But there's no one way to collect, to do a validation study, and validity is really a collection of multiple pieces of evidence, all of which lead you to be confident in the decisions that you're making.
Great question. Jody, were there any more from we have a few minutes left on the webinar. Were there any more that had come in?
I don't see any more questions. There were some questions about the slides. We'll be posting these online along with the recording, so don't worry about that. There was just one comment that I think most of the negative views on testing comes from the K through 12 area.
I think a lot of it that's absolutely true. I don't know if it's most or not, but I certainly say more comes from there than from any other segment of the testing industry, for a whole bunch of reasons, some of which are purely political, some of which are maybe legitimate in terms of tests, the way that the tests are being used, the stakes associated with them, things that don't really have to do with whether or not the tests are reasonable at doing what they were intended to do, which is evaluate student learning. So again, I think a lot of it has to do with tests being used for purposes that differ from what the original intent was, and again, maybe some other factors as well.
Hey, this is Sarah again. I think wanting to follow up on that point that serving on committees here on campus even we get completely different attitudes and understandings of the purpose of the procedures we're talking about. So I think, I do see it. It comes out in maybe more subtle ways on campus, but I think that is one of the roles of us in campuses, is to be able to bring attention to that. Actually, I had a completely different point that I, following from what Niar had been talking about with the perspective as test center admins and proctors, wondering if there are additional ways that we can actually more standard practices or expectations of test publishers. I'm thinking about something simple as cell phone policies and how completely different the responses are for different test companies, and training and supervising staff who get completely different instructions depending on which test they're giving. I think it actually diminishes the integrity, because they sometimes don't know which test they're supposed to respond in which ways, and have to go back to the company each time, if that makes sense.
Sarah, I would say quite honestly that even if you have a test that allows a cell phone to be on the person, but maybe on off or on airplane mode or whatnot, you should have just an overall policy for the testing center. I have that on my website, and of course, if anybody actually bothers to read, they'll come in and they'll have their sleeves pulled back. They'll have left their phone in the car. They'll only have on them like the keys and the ID and anything else that they're supposed to actually bring. I've had people walk up and say, I see that you're not allowed a cell phone. Can I store it somewhere? I think it's just an across the board item, for me at least, that there are certain things that are not allowed. I've only had one vendor that basically said that they were allowed to have their cell phones. I was entirely uncomfortable with it. I did allow it because that was part of it, and it was a whole group that was testing all at the same time, and that was their rules for their clients, and I wasn't supposed to take any of their personal items. But that is the only time I've made that exception. I think that there are certain rules that you need to have for the testing center, and whether or not it's higher standards than what the vendor or the third-party vendor might have, I think that those are the policies that would make everybody comfortable, because then you never have to second guess. And if any client comes in and says, well, I have a personal situation with this and I don't agree with it, well, that's okay. You can go to that vendor, you can go to that third party, you can go to whomever, maybe even like the teacher who said that it was okay, and you can have that conversation with them. These are the security protocols. And I think that's where you kind of need to stick it, only because that way there's no room, there's no grease to move that line.
Clarify what I'm talking about is the response that is expected when we find one that wasn't supposed to be there.
I apologize. Oh, I'm sorry. The response. Okay, so are you talking about the fact that there was recently a vendor who did state that if you found a cell phone, you were to confiscate it and to look through it? Is that conversation?
Unacceptable. And so those kinds of differences, I think, across the procedures can be, if you're giving 30 different kinds of tests, that can become very confusing, and I think leads to sort of sloppiness on the part of the proctor sometimes, because they don't realize that, those vast differences, or forget them in the moment. I guess that's what I'm talking about.
I hear you on that. I did not direct anything back to that vendor. I don't know if they're listening in or they're going to hear the webinar later on, and if they want to direct a conversation to the group as a whole later through email. I personally do not feel comfortable 100% confiscating any electronic item. I don't feel comfortable looking through somebody else's personal item. Definitely, you would want to talk to the legal counsel on your campus as to whether or not you even have the rights to that. Honestly, I think legally one of the things that you can stand behind if you had to take possession is, I think that when they signed up for that test, there might have been some fine language there that basically specifies they're not allowed to have something and it can be confiscated. And if they signed off on that, then you do have the legal rights to that. But I would honestly, I would say that you may want to take possession of the item, any item that you would find that would be electronic, but I would 100% across the board say that I would not feel comfortable. And I think that the vendor does need to understand that I don't think any of us feel comfortable going through somebody else's cell phone. So I would say that's probably the best way to talk to your proctors about that it's one thing to take the item in full view of maybe a camera, but not to go through it. without maybe having the vendor on the other line or your legal counsel there, because you are setting yourself up for a situation. And I do think we do need to talk to this vendor specifically about what we feel comfortable with and what we don't feel comfortable with, because I think there is too much of a weird legal shift on that. And I don't think any of us are looking to be sued for any of those repercussions that could possibly happen.
We have about 5 more minutes of everyone's time. Are there any additional last questions that have come through? If nothing else has come up, I want to thank everyone for coming out today, and I want to share something that literally came across my desk as we were talking. Cavion Test Security, who I'm going to put out there because I'll be sending this to the listserv, has started an e-magazine, and I'm very excited to say that it looks like the March edition, Dr. Wallach, you didn't mention anything about this, features Dr. James Wallach in an article talking about the value of test security and the importance of stopping test fraud. And it's a very important segue from our conversation. So take a look at it. I'll forward it to the listserv right after that. It's some good follow-up reading material talking about how we can discuss the value of testing. And an aspect of that is reducing the intellectual property loss going out of our office. And part of that is obviously test security. Jim, did you want to add anything else about the creation of this fantastic article? Or should I just leave it?
Yeah, I mean, not much I can add. So I actually just got it too, and so I haven't actually seen the written up article. But it was a fun process, thinking about, the field of test security, where it's been, where it's going. Was certainly an enjoyable experience. So I'm kind of excited to receive it as well.
Let's say, for instance, we have all 4 tickets set up for that time. A walk-in comes in.
All right. If there are no further questions, I want to thank again everyone. We look forward to continuing the conversation. Remember the plug from earlier. If you have something that you want to share, or you're interested in co-facilitating or facilitating a webinar in the near future, please let us know. Thank you all for coming out today. Have a great day.
Greetings and thank you for calling Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. Someone will be with you momentarily. Affectionately known as
then when I'm finding they're not even,
University.
I don't think they're even giving them the card.
Normal College for colored students on October 3rd